Good day, weary travelers, and welcome once again to Ye Ol' Comic Book Vault. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Dan.
And today, Dan and I are going to start a series, probably a very long series, on Walt Simonson's epic run on the mighty Thor. I have in front of me this tome. Look at the size of this thing.
It's huge, isn't
It's huge! So I have this giant tome here sent to us by Loki of Suburbia. And Loki of Suburbia, so he must be a giant Thor fan, big enough that he bought this. And he has loaned this to me, and it was really cool of him to send this, and I'm doing my best to take great care of it. And I will be reviewing this whole thing with Dan, because Dan happens to have this in trade also, though he doesn't get to read it in giant, oversized format like I do.
I have the Visionaries volumes, as you can see right here.
And so what we're going to do is we're going to be reviewing these a few issues at a time and in a series. So today we're beginning with the first issue of his run, which is Thor number 337, and we're going to go today through Thor number 342. So we're going to be covering the Beta Ray Bill story and another story right after it. We thought about doing the whole first trade that Dan has, and it's long.
It's very dense with material, too.
Exactly.
It's not one of those things like a Bendis trade where it's long and you can just blow through it in like a couple hours. This thing takes a long time to read.
And because of that, there was, not just does it take so long, but there was just going to be so much to talk about, and I didn't want to,
sure.
I didn't want to shaft anything, because there's a lot to talk about with this. Now, as you can see, I'm very excited about this. And if you know me, I'm not a Thor guy, and I'm freaking out. This is astounding work. I didn't know that there was any Thor that was like this, and this is apparently, for a lot of people, like the seminal run of Thor, right?
Yeah, this and JMS are the two things that are thrown around as being the best Thor things. A lot of people like the Stan Lee and Jack Kirby stuff too, but I haven't read a ton of that. I'd say this is probably my favorite Thor run.
And also, Dan, excitedly, somebody a while back sent us also the first two trades of JMS's Thor runs. So
nice.
We'll get to do that too if you have it.
Yeah, I have all of it. So
very fun. So anyway, let's go ahead and crack this puppy open and get rolling on Simonson's Thor. Dan, why don't you start? Have at thee, Dan.
All right. See, this era of Marvel specifically that this was written in is one of my favorite eras in Marvel's history, because it's 80s Marvel where you're getting a little bit more contemporary writing, and it's sort of not directly influenced by Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen, so you can have a little fun with it. The writing's contemporary, so it's not as goofy and overwritten as 60s stuff, and you can do long runs and set things up from issue 1 and just keep it going and tell long-form stories. And that's what I really liked about this, is it starts off very grounded with Thor, or as Donald Blake on Earth, just sort of as a regular day, and it has this one enticing event that spirals out into the story that will cover his entire run on Thor. It's one of my favorite things that comic books do, and especially superhero comics, is the long-form run. And you get the feeling just from the first issue when you're reading this that he's building something huge, just with the amount of characters that you're introduced to, the places that he hints at where he's taking all the characters. He very obviously has a plan for each and every one of them. It's just seeing the craft of this it's very pleasing to me as a fan and as a reader. This is some of my favorite ways that comic books tell stories.
You know, you're talking about long-form storytelling. This reminded me a little bit, though the writing, of course, is much, much different, of Claremont on X-Men.
Yeah, I actually thought of the same sort of comparison, because there's a lot of parallel things going on with the characters in here, too, that are similar to things Claremont did on X-Men.
Oh, I didn't even think of that. But you've got, like, these subplots that are happening, that are building in the background, that are obviously going to go someplace, but we don't really know where they're going yet. We've got, I mean, the stuff with Balder like we're 7 issues in, and we have no idea where that's going yet. Like it's just there in the background, and it's kind of interesting. Although I have to say that just for me personally, that would interrupt bits that I was really enjoying, and I would be like, no, I don't want to go back to Balder right now. I'm sure it's interesting, but I want to, I want to get back to Thor fighting this giant dragon dude, and things like that.
I think the subplot where you don't know exactly where it's going that works the best is the Loki subplot.
Oh, absolutely,
much more so than the Balder one, because while I do like the Balder one because I've personally read this and know where it's going later, I can see where you're coming from, because when I first read this, I was sort of bored with it too, and I was like, I don't know if I like this guy, but by the end of the Simonson's run, I ended up loving Balder, and he's one of my favorite Asgardian characters.
Wow, yeah.
But the not knowing what Loki's doing and him scheming in the background is very interesting, because you're trying to piece it together, and that totally suits his character, a guy that's mischievous and playing in the darkness and in the shadows and things.
Well, and isn't there, maybe I'm remembering this wrong, because there's a lot going on here, and I've never read this before. There's a bit where, is there a bit where Loki pretends to be Thor?
Yes, there is, when he's kissing...
Yeah, I thought that was Loki.
Sister,
and I'm just like, what is he doing? He's manipulating all these things behind the scenes, and you don't really know where it's going yet.
Yeah, he very obviously has a plan for all of these events that are happening, and he along with Odin really are sort of manipulating all of the things that are going on in Thor's world, and it'll be interesting to see where it goes in the future. It's very interesting, because Loki brings up this thing where he's talking about how Thor isn't really a thinker. He's a guy who just throws all of his might at something and hopes that he wins. And that's sort of the challenge for Thor here, is he's having these two people that are basically manipulating his entire life, and he's dictated by his honor-bound duty to his father, and Loki sort of changing the way he's living behind the scenes, and that's the sort of the place where I think he's going to be taking Thor's character, is sort of getting him out of that and saying, well, maybe I should be my own man instead of being dictated by all of these other people.
Now, I got to ask you, have you read all of this?
I have, yeah.
Okay, so this is going to be really interesting, because of course I'm not reading all this first before we review it. I'm actually reading this from group to group. So you'll have me as we do these videos saying, I wonder where this is going, and Dan going, I can't tell you.
Yeah.
I think that for my money, one of the more interesting things looking at this is Odin. And not only do I love the voice that he has for Odin, but like you said, he comes off like he's this extremely wise god who knows just what he's doing and always does the right thing, except that he also isn't above, letting his son die if that needs to happen. And you never know exactly what you're going to get with Odin.
Right, and I think the Viking culture in this plays a big part as to how these characters interact with each other, and I really appreciated the issue, actually the last issue in this group, where we meet the last Viking, and Thor sort of has a moment with him, and it does a lot for people that may not know Viking culture, sort of explain how their honor system works and their values and things. I thought Simonson had some really interesting parts in there where he even tied this last Viking guy into historical fact. It was this was very well researched, and I felt like Simonson obviously has a reverence for everything that he's writing in here. I mean, the Asgardian gods were having more parallels with their mythical counterparts than I had ever seen them before in Thor here, and he's obviously doing things with characters like Sif and the Warriors 3 that hadn't really got that much attention in other stories that I've read. It's just really interesting to see him play with all of these toys and play with them so well.
This is kind of my introduction to some of these characters, I hate to say, because I've not read a lot of Thor. Mm-hmm. And when I say a lot, I've not read any Thor. I've read Thor in other people's books. but I've not sat down and read Thor comics. And I've said this to Dan before. I have a very amusing reason for why I haven't read a lot of Thor comics. I don't like the font type that's usually used for dialogue in Thor comics. There, I've said it. I don't like it. Sometimes I find it difficult to look at. That's not in this, which I really appreciated.
Yeah.
First of all,
that.
I'll have to deal with that. You could have gotten me to read this a lot faster, telling me that. Well, I mean, I was going to read this anyway because the book came in from a viewer. But I mean, like, you know, if somebody had like told me, look, this is amazing, you have to go get it, and just said, look, that font's not in there. One of the things that I really love about this, straight out the gate, I mean, this was not a chore for me to read like I thought it was going to be. Straight out the gate, I thought, isn't it great that Simonson has Thor speaking so plainly, and yet he has the kind of grammar and syntax that you would expect from him. It's like the best of both worlds. Like, you can always understand what he's saying. It's like he's kind of speaking in plain English, but he has his own way of talking also. There's not so much like these and thys that are like totally weighing it down, and because I feel like sometimes when writers write that, this isn't just a matter, I don't think, by the way, of just trying to make it more accessible for people. I think it's that he just understands this terminology and this vocabulary, Dan. I don't think it's I think with a lot of other writers that do stuff like this, it's like they've got to thick it up with the these and thys and thous to make it sound like they know how to write that.
Yeah. Simonson almost seems like a guy who existed within that culture and knows it so well that he's able to write it in that way. It's so authentic. I definitely get what you mean there.
And I feel like it's easy for anybody to just pick it up and read it.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's, I know this is going to sound really funny, but it's a great way to expand vocabulary, too, because the man's got such a command of language.
Yeah, for sure. It's really interesting, and we can talk about this after too, how good of a writer this guy is and how great of an artist he is. This guy is one of the most talented people that I've seen work on a comic book before.
Absolutely.
He does both things so extremely well.
He has a huge command for both. It's not like
yes,
he can draw but he can't write, or he can write but he can't really draw. I mean, but everything is dynamic. Everything, he feels like he knows just where he wants to go with it, and he's not meandering around at all.
No, he gets to the point very fast, except for, well, I mean, getting to the point in the things that he wants to show you, necessarily, where other things are developing.
I almost said Beta Ray Bill was my favorite part, and then we got to The Last Viking, and I think that's actually my favorite part of what we've read so far. Because just like the dynamic that Thor has with that guy, and the way that these people don't just act within our cultural rules because we're the ones reading it. They have their own ways of doing things. And you said that, but I feel the need to reinforce it because you wouldn't necessarily expect that reading just modern stuff. I mean, like Thor right out says to him, because the idea, if you haven't read this, is that he's become too old to be really a warrior anymore, and is upset because he hasn't died a warrior's death in battle when he was young. And so he kind of tries to manipulate things so that Thor shows up and kills him so that he can basically go to heaven. And Thor it's really interesting how he handles it, because he's like I'm really impressed that you would have the gall to do that, even though you're sort of like trying to cheat your way into the afterlife. And then when the guy starts to kind of berate himself a little bit, because Thor's like, hey, I'm gonna go fight this big dragon guy, why don't you come with me, and then you can have your warrior's death. And then the guy kind of backpedals a little bit and goes, oh, I don't know if I'm worthy of this. And then Thor just straight up and is like, if you don't quit rebuking yourself, I'll kill you here and now like you wanted in the first place.
Yeah.
I loved that stuff.
Yeah, I really liked that too. And I liked how Thor sort of addressed to him too that the stories that were told about him aren't necessarily true anymore. And how I thought it was really interesting too, where Thor was talking about how nobody has prayed to him in thousands of years, and he was like hearing that guy across long distances and stuff. I thought that was really interesting too.
Yeah.
Because we sort of had a little parallel there with Thor at the time had lost the identity of Donald Blake and had been put on Earth and was sort of thrown into the Earth culture and didn't really belong there because he always had Donald Blake to sort of use as a crutch in fitting in.
Right.
And it's just sort of a difference of culture there, you know.
And I love how he loses that identity in this.
Yeah,
because of the Beta Ray Bill stuff.
Beta Ray Bill, too.
Yeah, and I like that he loses that, and then he has to develop another personality or persona, but he can't really be human anymore because now he's a god all the time.
Right. And did you appreciate the Superman cameo in there?
Actually, I hated that.
Oh, you did?
That was the one thing about this that I really didn't like. I wish they hadn't gone that. I wish he hadn't gone that far.
Oh, okay.
That was just me. I thought that was silly. Well, because okay, I have this thing with references where, and this is just me being picky, but I have a thing with references where if you're going to kind of wink to the audience, you shouldn't then nod your head really hard, and that's what he does. He has Thor like he has Fury give Thor glasses, and he says, "Well, it worked for the other guy," and then you turn the page and Clark shows up. And it's just supposed to be this kind of nod to Superman, but I'm just sort of like, well, we just had a little wink about it, and then you turn the page, and it's like a head-banging kind of reference. I didn't like that. I didn't need that.
I thought it was kind of funny.
Well, that's fine. I didn't like it, but whatever. I just saw it in Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, so maybe that was my problem with it. But anyway, I thought that was a little hokey.
Okay. Yeah, I can see where you're coming from.
Beta Ray Bill, go ahead.
Yes, Beta Ray Bill I think is really interesting because he has a lot of parallels going on with Thor, and Simonson does some nice things with him where Beta Ray Bill's sort of Thor's opposite at the beginning of the book, and they sort of switch positions by the end of the story, right, where Thor is this guy that's sort of accepted and loved by everyone, and Beta Ray Bill is this sort of outcast from a society that's a warrior in a culture that doesn't really appreciate warriors and just uses them as a means to an end. Whereas in Viking culture, it's celebrated and everyone loves them for who they are. And Beta Ray Bill comes into Asgardian culture and sort of finds a home there, while at the same time Thor loses his Donald Lake identity and is cast down to Earth and doesn't really know what to do, and he feels like an outsider. So it's really interesting seeing Thor put in a different place, and at the same time you get to give Beta Ray Bill a character arc and parallel them. I thought that was really well done, and one of my favorite things about this section of the book.
Yeah, I couldn't have said that better. I completely agree with you, and the parallels with all that is great. I got really interested in all of that for a much simpler and baser reason, and that was just simply, I'm used to the straight-up superhero comic where a bad guy shows up and you fight him and you beat him.
Yeah.
And Beta Ray Bill shows up and seems to be a villain. He's got a face like a scary monster dude. And you think that he's gonna be this big antagonist for Thor. And he manages to steal Thor's hammer. And you go, well, now how does that work? I thought he was kind of a bad guy. And he's like the only person that Thor's ever fought that could take his hammer away from him and then become Thor, basically. I mean, get the Thor garb and everything. And then you find out that he's kind of Thor's equal, not just in fighting prowess, but also he's Thor's equal in his in like the kind of person that he is.
Yeah, his nobility.
His nobility. And then they have to have this bit where where they're supposed to fight to the death. And I was like, this just totally went in an entirely different direction than I expected that it would, and it's so much more interesting. I didn't realize that Beta Ray Bill was going to become this extremely like fascinating, tragic kind of figure where like, because he's got to be his big warrior for his culture, they've made him into like, because he didn't used to look like this, and they've made him into this like horse-faced demon-looking guy who nobody can love. He can't like get married or like, and it's cool, by the way, that he kind of falls for Sif. Is it Sif that he falls for him?
Yes, it is, and I was going to mention that too. But
I'm sorry, I just want to make sure that I'm getting everybody right in this, because I'm not real familiar with this material, so I want to make sure that I'm correct in who I'm talking about. He kind of falls for Sif, and I really like that Simonson makes an issue, though subtly and I think with class, about how this guy would love to find a mate and have a wife, you know, and here's this woman that they have a lot of mutual respect for each other, and there's still kind of that thing kind of blocking it a little bit where, yeah, but you're a horse-faced demon guy.
Yeah.
And I just really liked that kind of that hurdle was there, and when he finally gets to get his hammer, because Odin, just for people that haven't read this, Odin forges a hammer for him because he wins Thor's hammer in the battle, basically because it's one of those things where, well, they can't die because we don't want either of these guys to die. So they fight in this kind of lava pit where he has the upper hand because he's more used to fighting in big lava pits, Beta Ray Bill, and then there's, I really like, by the way, there's this question of, did Odin do that on purpose? Did he give him the upper hand on purpose? You don't really know. Thor asks him, he kind of sideswipes the question, and Beta Ray Bill and Thor, it's one of those things where they both kind of like fall over at the end, and neither one dies, but Beta Ray Bill actually won the bout, and so he should have gotten the hammer, but Odin figures out a way to make this work honorably so that he gets his own hammer now. And what he does is he takes the spell that used to be on Thor's hammer that would make him human and turn him back into Donald Blake, and he transfers it over to what's the name of his hammer? Is it Windbreaker?
Stormbreaker.
Stormbreaker, yeah. So it's not like a jacket. It's not a windbreaker. It's Stormbreaker. It's a way better name than what I said. But anyway, so he gets the hammer, and he's now able to turn back into what he used to look like again. And I'm mentioning all of that to say this: I really like that he earns that.
Yeah, me too.
That's what he's been wanting this whole time, to get to be that again, to be what he used to be, and he's earned it.
Yeah, me too. And I wanted to sort of talk about Sif a little bit too, because you mentioned her there before, and I really liked what Simonson did with her here. And I think that the fact that she fell for Beta Ray Bill makes the utmost sense. And she seems to have this sort of thing with outsider men, where the reason she said she doesn't really connect with Thor anymore is because he's sort of has found a place in Midgard. In Asgard, he doesn't really associate with at all. Whereas Beta, so that's why she was sort of interested in him, is that he was this guy that was searching for a place in the world and he couldn't find it, and maybe she was thinking the same sorts of things. And then he finds a place and she's like, oh, well, we don't have anything in common anymore. We don't have anything that connects us. So the relationship ended, and then here comes Beta Ray Bill, who's everything Thor used to be, and she's infatuated with him.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And then when Thor sort of is put on Earth and is thinking about, like, oh, I don't really fit in here, the first place his mind goes to is, oh, I wish Sif was here.
Well, what I really like is that, again, not just being a straight-up antagonist for Thor, where they end up being not just allies but friends. You still have Beta Ray Bill, not just, like you said, being what Thor used to be for Sif, but even kind of being the new Thor. He's got his own hammer now, and he's got the garb of Thor. And
yeah, exactly.
It's really kind of cool that he sort of takes his place. But I love that Simonson was smart enough not to just take that to an obnoxious love triangle place, which it very easily could have gotten to.
Yeah, exactly. And I loved that Sif was written in such a way where she wasn't being shallow, that he was a demon-faced horse guy.
No, I guess I read that wrong. I thought that was actually kind of a problem for a minute, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I missed it, and that didn't happen.
Beta Ray Bill was the one that said, I'm this horse-faced monster.
Okay.
No one could ever love me.
I'm not worthy of you.
I look like this.
Yes.
And she's actually trying. She tries to touch his hand, and he moves away.
That's right. Okay.
So it's all about him. It's not about her. And she doesn't come off as shallow, and the relationship works.
Yeah, that's great.
I thought he did a lot of service to her character there.
I want to end my bit of this and feel free to bring up anything we didn't talk about.
Sure, yeah.
Just by saying that this is not the kind of thing that I usually latch onto. I am not big into this kind of mythology stuff. What's really weird is I, for whatever reason, have an affinity for Greek and Roman mythology that I have never found for Norse mythology. I don't know why that is. And I'm not generally big into big fantasy stories, although this definitely, as Dan pointed out to me before the show, has a lot of science fiction elements in it, too, especially with the background for Beta Ray Bill. Having said all of that, this is so good just on a story level, and Simonson has not just a command for the narrative, but also an absolute love for this material. He's like so enthusiastic about what he's presenting that's infectious, and I'm finding myself having the same kind of affinity for it because he's kind of throwing that affinity at me, and I can't help but eat it up. And so I'm loving this. It's absolutely brilliant. And I'll go this far. I think already this is maybe some of the best comic work I've ever taken a look at. I love it.
Oh yeah, I'd agree with you 100%. And to people that are Thor fans with this, I think it's very important to say that this is very Kirby-esque in how it deals with the science fiction and fantasy mixing of the elements, because a lot of people will either do the high fantasy take on Thor or the hard science fiction Thor, going across the cosmos kind of thing with him fighting Galactus like he did in the recent Fraction stuff. This is blending those two things seamlessly.
Absolutely,
and it works really well. So you get the best of both worlds. If you're not a fantasy guy, there's sci-fi stuff here for you. If you're not a sci-fi guy, there's tons of fantasy stuff here for you. And if you're a guy that just likes grounded stuff about people, like what Marvel's all about, you have Thor on Earth trying to adjust to a culture that he's never really been in before, and sort of learning the lessons of everyday life. And it's got everything in here that makes Thor what he is and what makes Marvel special, and I can't say enough good things about it.
Well, next time that Dan and I get together, we'll be bringing you more Simonson Thor, and we've got a lot to get through. This is, if we keep doing this in 6-7 issue arcs like this, or chunks, I think we've got maybe a good couple of months on this, Dan.
Oh, awesome!
I doing this in a
weekly. Going back and reading this, so I'm up for it.
Well, I'm excited about it, and I gotta say this is gonna sound funny, but I'm really glad that I'm excited about it because there's so much of it we got to get through. So so yay! It's gonna be really, really exciting. Thanks everybody for watching the Comic Vault as always. Dan, thanks for joining me and for getting through the tome with me.
Yeah.
If you ever want to send us anything to review on the Comic Vault, feel free to send that to our P.O. Box. That's Geekvolution, P.O. Box 14183, Lenexa, Kansas 66285. If it's another tome, it's going to have to wait, because we got a lot to get through here. And we're going to be taking a brief hiatus here on Geekvolution, if you haven't heard about that already, starting on Friday. And we'll be back at the 31st of January with the prologue for Spawn Year. And then starting on January 1st, we'll be back to normal stuff on Geekvolution. Normal, except that there will be lots of Spawn Year happening simultaneously. And Dan and I will be coming back to you with more vaults. Then we'll have more stuff from Vince. He's been doing a series on the Phantom. That's going to continue again starting tomorrow. He's got a couple more of those left to do. And both he and I also have tons of other things in the can that we've got to read and review. So anyway, lots of exciting things going on in the Comic Vault. Lots of exciting things going on Geekvolution. Thanks everybody so very much for watching on Tooth Gnasher, on Tooth Grinder. Thanks everybody for watching the Comic Vault. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Dan.
And we'll see you next time.